All right, everybody, welcome to week 15. This week we're going to do module 4, and this is the last module in the Cisco Networking Academy thing. Um, so I think I've mentioned a few times that they've rearranged how the course was laid out. This module is just labeled miscellaneous, and they cover a bunch of different things. Some are related, some aren't. They're going to cover um, generators, iterators, and closures. First off, you've seen these before. It shouldn't be too hard to wrap your head around. So I'm not going to cover that in my video. There are a couple things I do want to cover. At first being how to work with files. Since I have some Mac users in here, they say Python is smart enough to be able to figure out what system you're working on and change the file paths accordingly. But just know that when you're working with files on a Mac, you want to open a file. It's going to be using the forward slashes. So your directory / file name and the extension. If you're using Windows, you need to use the backslashes, and that can be confusing because what does this do? It makes this it changes how Python reads that F. Like it's not going to read it. So you need to use 2 backslashes, and that if you print, let's see, 1 and 2. So like if you print this, print file 2, you'll see that it shows down here that it just sees a single slash, but you have to use 2 in these cases. It can be a little confusing and frustrating, but just remember that. For the homework and stuff, this week there's going to be several assignments. You won't have to worry about that too much because we're going to try and use everything in the same directory, so you don't have to go searching for it. And to do that, the first thing that we need to do this week is, if you're like me and you work on Scratch files a lot, they will not interact. They're actually saved in a temporary file, where your PyCharm stuff is stored. If you want it to correctly find the files in the same folder that you're working on, you need to save that in that folder. So just go to File, Save As, make sure you know where it's being saved. You can use these little 3 buttons here, open it up, and find whatever folder you're working from. Mine is this homework folder. And I'm going to save it as like week 15, just so I know what it is. Hit OK. You can close the Scratch file. We're going to work on this one. That way, when you look in your folder, you'll see the saved Python that you're working in, and you can, like I have some text files in here, which I'm going to go ahead and access, and then if I create any files from here, they'll be created right in this folder, so we don't have to worry about the directory structure. So working with files, so you want to work with files and we're just working with simple text files here. If you're going to start working with Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, PDF files, they have an underlying structure that you need to understand first. And there are several libraries out there that can help you do that, but that is beyond the scope of this course. So we're just doing simple text files here. The first thing you want to do is open a file. And before I do that, these cheat sheets right here, file, read, and write stuff. So again, this is going to be difficult to remember unless you do a lot of these. So maybe save this file somewhere so you can refer to it later. But R for reading, and it tells you the pointer's placed at the beginning of the file. R plus means it's open for reading and to writing. So if it's just open for reading, it won't let you write to that file. But there are different things that you need to remember, especially if you don't want to. If you have information in a file and you don't want that destroyed, you have to be very careful about how you open that file. If you use W just to write to a file, it's going to overwrite an existing file. So anything in that file is going to be overwritten and gone when you go back to it, except for what you write in this one session every time you run that script. So you need to be very careful. Reading, writing, overwriting the file. There is you can read and write in binary. I don't know why you'd ever do that. We don't ever do that. A is for appending. So if you have information in the file and you just want to add information to it, you need to use append. And here it will put the pointer at the end of the file, so it's not overwriting anything else, and it'll just continue to write from the bottom of the file. But it does create a file if there isn't one there. So if you want to create a file, write to it, you may just want to use append instead of write, because it's going to create that file if it's not already there. But that's up to you, and you'll have to determine what the best use for your particular project is. So back in PyCharm, for instance, I have a couple of files already in here, like the lorem and lorem paragraphs. You'll see these later for some assignments. But if I just want to open and read it, right, the file open, you got to put the file name in quotations, and then you have to tell Python how you want to open that file. So here the variable file is going to store the information of the file. You want to tell it to open, give it a file name, and tell it read, write, append. Once you can do that, then you can start acting or doing stuff to that file. Or you're not actually doing stuff to the file, you're doing stuff to the variable that contains the information of the file, but that's maybe a little complicated. But if I just want to print the file information, print file right here, run it, and that didn't work. Of course not. So again, as I was saying, it doesn't actually act on the file. It acts on the variable that contains the file. And in this case, the variable is simply a pointer to the file. But if I do this, it starts to read it. So when you add this for statement in here, it's going to read each line in the file and then print that line. And it just goes on. It reads it as one giant line and writes the whole thing out into your console. So that's how you read a file. You wanted to write a file. Let's change this. So make sure I don't have a file with that name in the directory, and we're going to name it test or write test. Test. So there's no file here named write test. So we're going to create that file. We're going to open it as a write so we can write to it. And then file.write. And then you just type in, this is a test file. We run that. Obviously, you're not going to see anything in the console. But when you open up your directory again, you can see here's the file you just created. If you open that up, there's the text that you put in there. So that's how you create a file and write to the file. Now remember, now the file exists, so if I just go to, if I just put the R in there, what's it going to do? It's going to overwrite everything that's in that file. So if I run this, I'm going to change that to W. So if I run that, okay, so here's a good little example. I changed that to R, and I tried to write to it, and I got the error message saying, hey, you can't write to it. You only open it in read mode. So that's good to know. Change it to W, run it again, and then I go back to my write test file. It didn't append anything. It didn't add to it. It got rid of everything that I did before and then rewrote what I told it to write this second time. But if I do the A, and run that, it will append it right to the end. So this is the overwritten text, and this is the appended text. You gotta, if you want it formatted in a specific way, you gotta add your own spaces and that kind of stuff in there, tell it to write spaces. But that's the difference between a read, write, and append in short form. Now remember, there's plenty of other ways to open a file, and these will be specific to what you're trying to do. So like this X here, if you just want to create a file and do nothing else, X creates the file. Doesn't let you read or write to it, but it'll create the file. And if a file already exists, it will fail. Now that may be a good way to check to see if a file exists before you do anything. So when it fails, you can trigger another action. Again, it's all going to be project specific. We want to read. We want to read from a file. There it is. So I showed you how to read and print for every line, print just everything in there. But if you want to, most of the time you're going to want to read what's in the file and do something on it, perform a function on the data that's in that file. And like a couple of your assignments. So let's do lorem.text. We just want to open it to read. We don't want to change any of the contents. And let's count all the A's in that file. Let's create a variable to hold the count of the A's for a line in file. So this is gonna read each line in the file, and then for every character in the line, we want to look at every character. If the character is lower, and because we want to see if there's any uppercase A's or lowercase A's, we want to find both. So if we just convert everything to lower, we'll get all of that. If the lowered character is equal to A, we are going to add to the A count. And then we can, and there are that many A's. So it's going to read each line in the file, and then it's going to read each character in each of the lines. If the character in the lowercase is an A, it's going to add one to the count, and then we're going to print out that count. And it says there are 29 A's in the document. So this is something that you're going to have to remember for a couple of assignments. Oops. This week. In the, not that one, let's see, string methods. This is string methods part 2. You remember string method, the first one, we did the is digit is alpha. We counted everything that was in there, or the digits, the alphas, the spaces, the uppers, the lowers. And you're going to use the lorem paragraphs text, which is right here. Just download that and run it on this. And I think that your output should look like this. So you're going to do something like we just did with that document, you're going to combine this assignment and that last one. So basically all you're doing for this assignment versus the last one is taking in a file rather than somebody just typing stuff in. And the histogram file the histogram frequency chart thing. It's a lab. So pay attention to this week. I'm asking you to do these labs in PyCharm rather than in Networking Academy. Now, certainly, if you want to do it in there and it works, and then just copy and paste it over, that's fine. But I want a Py file this week, just so I can. The output's a little bit long. It's hard to see in those screenshots. It's just easier for me if you do it in PyCharm. So again, you're going to use that lorem.txt. I just showed you. I got the same 29 A's. You just got to figure out how to do the rest of these. And for this, I probably wouldn't do, okay, if it's A, if it's B, if it's a series of if statements. You can certainly do that and it'll work, and I'll give you 100. But what I would probably do is something like make a dictionary, like this one. It contains all letters of the alphabet, just because this is easier. And what I would do is update the value in each one. Every time it finds something, update the value. You can do that. But the code, you write a lot less code if you do it this way, but I don't want to give you the answers. I want you to think about how you would get that done. So that's all I'm going to leave you. If you do a bunch of if statements, that's fine too. And that would be the histogram assignment using the lorem.txt file. The other assignment, create a file. Yeah, you're going to do just what we saw a second ago. Create a file and write your name, the class, date and time. Speaking of date and time, there is another kind of cheat sheet that I put up here, the time options, time format options. And these are this is what you use to get the specific result when you're working with time. They'll go over this again in Networking Academy, so I don't want to repeat a bunch of information and just make you spend more time each week in class. But this is useful because I don't remember this stuff. I have to look it up every single time. But if we want to get the date and time, how do we work with date and time? So write test file. All right, so a simple thing to remember, dates and times. From date time, import date time. Now you can just import date if you just want to work with the date. I don't know why you wouldn't want date and time. I wouldn't probably ever use anything less than this, but you can just import the date, which I think is weird. So if I run this, you'll see exactly when I'm making this video. It's 4/10/222 at 13:44, and a whole bunch of other little dots at the end. I don't know. This is useful. I mean, you're going to want a lot of time and date stamps if you're working, especially if you're working with files. But a lot of programs do a lot of logging, and that helps you determine when things happen and when things break, that kind of stuff. So knowing how to use date and time is important. And you got to figure out how you want it printed, right? So if we print now dot strf time, and then we put in the big Y slash little m slash little d. This should give us year, month, date. Those slashes are actually printed, which is, I guess, follows suit with everything else we've been doing. You run that and you get, now it's 1349, but see year, month, date. And in one of your assignments, you will need to print a bunch of different formats just to kind of do it. Again, this is a lab that I'd like you to do in PyCharm rather than in the lab. You can do it in a lab and then copy and paste. It's fine with me. But I want you to do it in each of these different formats. Just kind of familiarize yourself with which of the big Y, little y, big M, little m, and the difference between the two. So, and you can print, it's the third weekday of the week. It's the 309th day of the year, or at least it was when I wrote that assignment up. It's going to be different now. Yeah, it's fairly simple. Follow along if you have any questions. Give me a holler. And it looks like that is all I need to cover. Working with files is the big thing. Working with text files, nobody really uses like Notepad anymore. That's the only true text file there is without a whole bunch of gobbledygook underneath. But it's a good start. And when you start working with libraries later on, you'll figure out how to use Word files, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, because those are obviously most common for business applications. And like I said, this is the last week for Cisco Networking Academy. Next week and the following week, last 2 weeks of class. So I've been told apparently you're supposed to have a spring break the next week, April 18th and 25th. We already had one, and I think it's kind of odd to put it the second to the last week of the course. However, what I'm going to do is open up both weeks at the same time. I will show you how to use Kinter, which is the graphical user interface thing that's built into Python. I'll show you how to build a calculator, and then the following week we'll add functionality to it so it'll actually work. It'll be a working calculator. That'll be your final project. But I'm going to open up both weeks at the same time. That way you can do the part 2 summary test. Maybe I should put that on this week. I don't know. Either way, I want you to get the summary tests out of the way, the Networking Academy stuff out of the way, so that while it's fresh in your mind, and not wait another 2 weeks before you have to take that test. So I'm going to open up the rest of the course probably the beginning of next week. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email. Thanks.